excellent. It is working. Thinking about playing a little Vampire Survivors. I have it pulled up. But until then, probably just a little bit of this. I'll be back next week, like actually with time and sort of a plan, because my partner will be back at school, and so my schedule changes a little bit. Let's check my levels. Actually, let's turn that. Let's turn it down. That's probably better. Anyway, she goes back to school. While she's been home, I've been trying to go to bed basically straight after work so that I can be up. But now that she'll be at school all day, I don't have to really worry about that. So I'll probably do some streaming before I go to bed. Hard to believe, kind of nice, kind of a bummer. Summer's almost over. You know, it's been a pretty good summer. We've been able to do a good number of activities. Both of our families have been out, so that's been nice. I don't have the green screen up right now because we have had to use the guest room for guests. Hello, Salma. I'm happy to see that you have not had a terrible accident driving yet. Summer's going all right. World Cup is pretty good. I feel pretty happy with how we did. It's very hot. It's very hot here, which is not supposed to be. I assume it is also hot in North Africa. But where I live, we are almost 6,000 feet above sea level, 2,000 meters above sea level. It's not supposed to be this hot in the mountains in the summer, but it's been all right. Have you had a good summer? Did you get the summer off from school? I don't know what your school schedule is. I will be streaming more regularly starting next week, by the way. So, film studios, I'm assuming? I'm not. Okay, I'm looking it up. Okay, Kingdom of Heaven, I haven't seen that. Gladiator, I haven't seen that. Mummy Returns, I have seen. Lawrence of Arabia, have not seen that. That's cool. Is it just like a trip that you are taking for fun, or is it connected to school or a group activity? Okay. Well, that's cool. I know. I mean, I'm looking at it on Google. Looks like it's not that far away. So, or at least not that far away from the actual city. Just a little outside. I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce that. Oh, congratulations. Done with undergrad. I know you were studying English. Are you hoping to do secondary school? I don't know what the route is in Morocco. Or are you looking to just start working? It's weird for the fall to come and no school to go to. It's a strange feeling the first time that really happens. I really like this artist. Okay. Well, I have good thoughts about English teachers. My wife is one. Obviously, it'd be a little bit different. So, I apologize if this is ignorant. I haven't been to North Africa. My main experience with countries that teach English is India. And in India, obviously, almost everybody, it is a second language, right? I mean, you probably have some kids who have mixed parents or were born in the US or something. But for most people, it's second language. And mostly that is private school or it's paid. It's not included with standard curriculum. So would you be teaching like specialized, or would you be just at a public school? Everybody goes to math, everybody goes to geography, everybody goes to English. It is interesting to be somebody whose language is studied that aggressively. Because, like, in America, you know, a lot of people take French in school. A lot of people take German. People probably mostly take Spanish because Mexico is our closest neighbor that doesn't speak primarily English. They speak Spanish. Not the same as Castilian Spanish, but still understandable. So those are the three, you know, major languages that people in the U.S. study as part of high school. But it is, it's not a big deal if you don't speak French, right? Because everybody speaks English. That's sort of the rule now. It's like the olden days of Latin. You know, it's the lingua franca, which was French, but never mind. But it is weird because, like, I feel bad about it. It's very awkward to have people who speak their own language perfectly well speak English moderately well and apologize for their poor English. Because I understand it. One, I understand it's frustrating to not necessarily be able to communicate as effectively or as fluidly as you would like. And it makes you feel a little bit dumb, you know, when you're not able to do that. But there's no chance I could get through a sentence in Arabic or Tamazight, or probably French, frankly. And I speak English pretty well. Even for a native speaker, I speak good English. But a lot of people don't, and they're native speakers. It's strange to be aware of being the center of the world in some respects. And I don't think it's like a good thing necessarily. I would say it's preferable to some other countries at least. But it is it's a strange thing to step outside and think, yeah, this is basically the same thing as the British Empire or the Mughal Empire or the Spanish Empire or whatever, the Egyptian Empire. Just the Roman Empire probably is the main one that people would refer to. It's just like everybody sort of waits on what we do, good and bad. And it's strange. I don't think that's going to last. I mean, obviously, no other empires have lasted. I don't know how much more time we have. There are various degrees to which people will celebrate America no longer being like the pop culture and soft power capital of the world. But it's going to happen at some point. And the question is, will it happen during my lifetime? Or will it happen in 100 years? Because a lot of times you underestimate how much a system can take. You think, surely this is going to be too much. But people just keep going to day-to-day lives. I mean, do you think about, let's take a slightly less, I think it would be silly to bet against China because they have the population base and they now have the technology base. India has infrastructure issues that I have seen firsthand. Not that those can't be solved, and not that China doesn't have their own, but China's economy is pretty well developed at this point. They have a very strong state. They have some internal issues, but as far as the ability to sort of be the bank of the world, because that's what America is, right? Among other things, we are the world's bank. You buy American bonds, you get things in dollars, right? Again, not saying that's good or bad, but we have had a very stable political environment, and we've been very pro making money for the last couple hundred years, and we've been a pretty safe investment. We'll see how long that lasts, but that's the state of things, right? Again, it is totally fine for people to not like America. I understand that. I think it's valid, but if we're just speaking in pragmatic terms here, is the way it is. There aren't too many other countries that have the economy and political stability that you would trust to sort of fulfill that same role. And I do think China is probably the closest one, right? China is huge. You could say, well, maybe England, maybe Germany. Germany at this point seems to be a pretty tightly run ship. But they're just not that big. And China is where all the manufacturing is now. Not all of it, but a great deal of it. And it wouldn't surprise me because, a lot of people speak English, but an awful lot of people speak Mandarin and Cantonese as well. So you can argue that people should be learning those languages, and people are making those arguments. And I don't think that will be good necessarily. I don't think America being in charge, again, has been good necessarily. I think that it could have been a lot worse. Like, on the one hand, America abolished slavery. It's good. Officially, we don't do colonial takeovers. We don't do expansionism the way the British Empire did. Those are both good, I think. Now, we didn't abolish slavery until like 150 years ago, 160 years ago. And Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands are territories of the United States, but are not states. So the colonialism thing, doesn't seem to hold up either. But officially, our policy has been pretty much pro-democracy. Anti-fascist. We used to be anti-fascist. Anti-communist, certainly. And varying degrees of anti-interventionist. So we preferred to just dominate via soft power, right? We don't need to own your company or your country or your territory, but if you want to do business, you're going to use American dollars, right? It's good business for us. And again, is that good? Probably not, but until we get the world that I dream of, where everybody works together in harmony, somebody's going to be carrying a big stick. And the question is, can you pay them not to use the stick on you? Or are they going to use the stick on you and then take your money? Right? That historically, Rome was pretty comfortable with, as long as you pay us tribute, you can even have your own rulers. We don't care. You can have your own local governor, right? Frankly, that makes our jobs easier because he already speaks the language. He already knows the customs. The people already know who he is. We're happy to leave that guy in place. But you just got to pay us our money. If you don't pay us our money, there will be problems. And they will be very violent problems. And then we may occupy your territory, right? That's more been the U.S. model, whereas other countries, throughout history, other empires, it was a lot more of just like invade and drive out the locals and take the territory, or enslave the locals and take the territory. I would argue that giving people the chance to pay you instead of just getting killed is probably better. But here's the thing. All right, I know I'm wandering a bit. But, look, we just started a fucking war with Iran 5 months ago for no reason. So this is kind of on my mind. The world I envision is a world where we can understand that there is no more scarcity, particularly food and housing. We have more than enough for everybody in the world, no matter how much work you do, no matter if you have money or no money, whether you live in the favelas or in the hills or whatever. Everybody can have food. Everybody can have a place to live. We have enough. We don't need to worry about scarcity of resources. The problem, though, is that if you do that, then some poor people will get some nice things that rich people think they shouldn't get. They don't deserve. Or some countries who have people in them that we don't like, well, they won't be starving. I think about Yemen here specifically, right? Hey, look, I'm not perfectly woke. I don't know every humanitarian crisis going on, but I know there have been massive famine and starvation problems in Yemen, undernourished, and Palestine also. I mean, fuck it, that also has been a clear and obvious issue and tactic, using hunger as a weapon, which is supposed to be against the Geneva Convention, But again, now we go back to the U.S. everybody kind of does what we say, and we say that it's not a war crime right now, what's happening. And that is not a pleasant place to have to be. Like, listen, if I had any influence or power, that would not be the case. But I cannot do anything about the official policy of my country. Anyway, that would be the world I envision. We don't need anybody to be poor. There's no reason anybody has to be poor. There's no reason anybody has to be hungry. There's no reason anybody has to sleep on the street. If people choose to sleep on the street, even though dignified housing is available to them, and I say dignified on purpose, I don't mean just a hovel, it's like a hut, with no running water. I mean like a proper, maybe even just a studio apartment, but a proper place to live where you can feel like a goddamn human with some self-respect, right? If people choose to reject that, there's nothing you can do except put them in jail, right? But most people would be happy if they didn't have to pay rent. And I mean, here's what is true is that this is 100% possible, right? The world that I envision could easily be achieved because the resources are there. Just imagine if this sort of world did exist, right? We would be able to spend a lot less money on the military and on law enforcement, because a lot of law enforcement is just fucking with poor people. Poor people commit the most crimes because poor people are living on the fringes. A lot of poor people don't have very good educations, so they don't necessarily know either that what they're doing is a crime or what the consequences for that crime could be, right? So that's where the majority of our policing resources go to. Policing black people and policing poor people. If we just made it so that there were no people who were homeless or who felt like they needed to steal food or just steal because they didn't have enough, you wouldn't need as many cops, right? If you weren't worried about hoarding resources from other countries, you wouldn't need as much military power because you don't worry that people are going to come in and take what you have, and you don't feel like you need to go in and take what somebody else has. Understand, this is very utopian, okay? I'm just saying the money, the ability to do this exists. We have the money, we have the housing, we have the ability to create this world, right? It will never happen. Yeah, maybe never is strong. It won't happen during my lifetime because people are selfish and people don't want to work together, right? Our governments in many countries, mine obviously, but like in Morocco, you're a monarchy, right? So that's one thing, monarchies maybe don't want to work so closely with like socialist nations. I'm sure Morocco has countries that they don't like. Everybody's got racists. In Europe, everybody hates the Romani people for who knows why. There are, I'm sure, racisms in Africa that I don't even understand. And so when you have these kinds of prejudices, they stop you from working in a way that would make life better for the people that you hate, right? Obviously, I'm talking about the rest of the world, but let's just focus on my own country and our sins. I'm not trying to hide. Black people in America. Look, racism here is a lot less of a problem than it is in many parts of Europe and South America. I'm not being dismissive, but it is a lot quieter here, and black people are largely much more accepted than they are in Africa or Spain or France. You may recall, or Argentina. I don't know if you saw the video from the Argentina national team a few years ago singing about how they're not like France and they don't need black people on their team. I think they said Africans, right? So there's a lot of really aggressive open racism in other parts of the world. But in America, there is plenty of racism. And some of it is less outwardly treating black people worse and more, I don't want black people to have it as good as I have it, right? I don't want them to have a good life. I would be happier. This is true. And if you think about your own life, I can absolutely guarantee you there are moments that you can think of where you were like, I am, like maybe it's your sister or your brother or a cousin or something that was getting in trouble. You're like, I'm happy for my own privileges to be restricted a little bit if it means that my cousin gets fucked, right? If it means that this person I don't like has it worse, right? I'll get us both in trouble because they're going to get in trouble more than I will. There is that element of like things like socialism, things like universal basic income, right? I don't know if that's a thing that's been talked about in Morocco or if you've learned about UBI at all, but the idea of UBI is everybody gets a certain number of dollars every month that's supposed to be enough for you to live on. Let's say with some frugality, right? You're not living big, but you can live on this money, and it just because you're a citizen or because you're a resident, certainly they would try to limit it to citizens, but just because you live in a place, you get a certain amount of money to live there. And that sort of sounds crazy. And then you also think, well, now these lazy people, these bums that I don't like, these, again, depending on your religion, these non-Muslims, these non-Christians, these non-Jews, these non-Catholics, they get free money from the government for doing nothing. I know I get that money too, but I don't want it if it means they get it, right? So people will absolutely work against their own interests just so that other people won't get it. And I don't understand that. This is the difference between like conservatives and liberals. In America, it'd be Republicans and really leftists, but universally, I don't know if you've read like Frantz Fanon, who really worked in the resistance movement in Algeria against the French, but the right, the conservatives, what they want is they want to limit access. They want to close the door to people, right? This is all of the good stuff, the rights, the privileges, the benefits, the medical care, all, and we're going to limit it as much as we can. Now, there's enough for everybody, but we just don't like some of those people, so we're going to try to keep the door closed. I am not here to say that all leftists are perfect, or that there's even one real defining characteristic of what being on the left is. But at least in my conception of the world, if I got what I wanted, right? If I got a society that functioned the way I think a society should function or could function, the people that are my political opposition would also benefit. If I think that everybody should have free access to healthcare, which I do, I think everybody should have free healthcare. That means that my political opponents, the people who would call me slurs, the people who would call you all kinds of horrible names, that means they would also get good stuff. They would also get to have free healthcare. And some of these people are really racist and really bigoted and really, really unpleasant. And I still want them to have free healthcare because I think they should have it. I don't want to be in charge of saying who deserves it and who doesn't, because nobody deserves it, or everybody does. That's the way I look at it. And I think everybody does. Everybody is part of this society. It benefits your society for people to be healthy, right? You get more productive people, they live longer, they spend less time in the hospital. There are practical reasons why we should want people to have better access to healthcare. And many of them are economically useful. But again, then some people that I don't like will have a little bit of a better life. UBI is one of those things that people don't like because they think that you'll be giving lazy people the chance to just be lazy, right? Well, they don't have to get a job if they have the government giving them money. And some people would probably not work. Some people already don't work. Some people are very creative in the ways they figure out how to trick the system so they don't have to work. So that's already a problem. We already know that exists. But here is what I know. I have done some miserable jobs in my life because I needed to make money, because I needed to feed myself and pay the rent. And so I had to do a job that was either physically difficult or not mentally rewarding at all. You know, this is true of most people. Most people don't get to do for money the things they value, right? Maybe it's art, maybe it's music, maybe it's sports. That's a little tougher because there is, sort of a talent gap that you have to be able to cross. But art, music, writing, people would, look, again, I'm getting very utopian here, right? Perfect world. But if you didn't have to work full time, right? I'm just going to use round numbers. I don't know what the exchange rate is. I don't know what a normal apartment, like say a 1-bedroom. I don't know what that would cost you in, a decent city. Doesn't have to be the capital, but just like a decent place where you could get a job, live in a city. I don't know what the price of that would be in your currency, but let's say in America that's $1,000, which is a pretty cheap really right now, but that's a nice round number. So rent is $1,000 a month for a 1-bedroom. And let's say the government just says we're going to give everybody $1,000 a month. We're going to fund it with taxes or whatever, but we're gonna do $1,000 a month. Or you could also just say we're going to give everybody housing vouchers, which would be the exact same function as giving people money. And you could probably work out a deal with the landlords to get to cut the cost, right? Anyway, so you don't have to pay for your housing, right? Your housing is officially not a budget item that you have to worry about. How much more freedom would you have to choose how much you worked, right? Because for most people in America, housing is like 30 to 40 to 50% of your monthly budget, right? So if you all of a sudden you have 40% more money than you had yesterday, how would that change the way you live? Because you can work just as much and you can make more money, right? Because that $1,000 that you were spending on rent, you don't have to spend it on rent. You still have the ability to make that same money, right? Let's, again, just a round number. Okay, oh man, I gotta move to Morocco. Okay, so $300 a month. I assume monthly income is also lower, again, inflation, etc. But in America, we'll just call it $1,000. And let's say you make $48,000 a year. Okay, that's okay money. That is $4,000 a month. Now it's pre-tax, but I'm just using round numbers for simplicity. You make $4,000 a month. $1,000 of that goes to rent, right? Now, let's say you get that $1,000 back. So now you make $4,000 a month. You could work less if you wanted to. You could cut back your hours. You could change jobs and work full time doing something that is more rewarding but isn't as financially useful. Maybe you could quit your job. Maybe you could take 6 months off, right? And then you could go back to work, because a lot of people value working. A lot of people value being able to contribute and do something useful with their time. It's just that so many people, and this is, I'm going to pull it up because it's good, but this is something that David Graeber talks about, and it's very true. A lot of people realize that the job they have, whatever it is not adding anything to the world. It's not making the world a better place. It's not changing anybody's life. It's sending an email to somebody else in your company about an email they need to send. And people recognize that it's undignified. Even if it's highly compensated, right? Even if you make a lot of money to do it, it's not dignified work. Because what do you do all day? How do you explain your job to people? I sent an email. Man, I got a really angry email back. And then that was 20 whole minutes of my day was that email. I have had those kinds of jobs. All right, I'm not just like ripping on these people. I've had those kinds of jobs. People value, a lot of people value food service. They value making, like, I would like to be able to do coffee, right? I think coffee is a really cool thing you could do. And I think this is the essay. Yeah. We'll read this in a second, but there are a lot of people who would quit the job they're currently doing to do something else. Not that they would quit working, but that they would leave the job they're doing that they don't enjoy or that is very taxing or whatever, and they would change to a different job. They would do something that maybe they make less money, but they're closer to home, or they have better hours, or they only work part-time. And that would change the way, art is created. We would have a lot more art being made, music, poetry, writing, because people would have the freedom to work on projects, take time off, or have a little bit of extra money to spend on resources, cameras, whatever. They would have the ability to focus more on the stuff outside of just work, outside of making enough money to live. And the thing is, I'm not gonna go too long on this. The thing is, capitalism really needs people to be underpaid and on the margins, so that they do the jobs that people don't want to do, right? You kind of need people to be precarious so that they will take the job and they won't try to unionize and they won't try to get more rights and more. So anyway, David Graeber, he was an anarchist, he was an anthropologist and a sociologist, and I believe he was a professor. He died a few years back, which is sad. But he wrote an essay that then became a book called Bullshit Jobs. And I read it. I read the book, and I think it was very, very powerful. And again, I have no idea the differences or similarities between the Moroccan view of money, culture, corporate ladder, and versus the American one, but this is a pretty good representation of the American one. So I'll just read this aloud. Yeah, this is going to be long. Go ahead. You can ask questions or whatever while I'm reading. I will try to I'll try to get through this. Oh yeah, like working while you're in school. On the one hand, it teaches you how to be in a workplace. On the other hand, you don't have as much time to worry about your studies. You know. Okay, I'm gonna read this. In the year 1930, John Maynard Keynes predicted that by century's end, technology would have advanced sufficiently that countries like Great Britain or the United States would have achieved a 15-hour work week. There's every reason to believe he was right. In technological terms, we are quite capable of this, and yet it didn't happen. Instead, technology has been marshaled, if anything, to figure out ways to make us all work more. In order to achieve this, jobs have had to be created that are effectively pointless. Huge swathes of people, in Europe and North America in particular, spend their entire working lives performing tasks they secretly believe do not really need to be performed. The moral and spiritual damage that comes from this situation is profound. It is a scar across our collective soul, yet virtually no one talks about it. Why did Keynes's promised utopia, still being eagerly awaited in the 1960s, never materialize? The standard line today is that he didn't figure in the massive increase in consumerism. Given the choice between less hours and more toys and pleasures, we've collectively chosen the latter. This presents a nice morality tale, but even a moment's reflection shows it can't really be true. Yes, we have witnessed the creation of an endless variety of new jobs and industries since the 20s, but very few have anything to do with the production and distribution of sushi, iPhones, or fancy sneakers. So what are these new jobs precisely? A recent report comparing employment in the US between 1910 and 2000 gives us a clear picture, and I note one pretty much exactly echoed in the UK. Over the course of the last century, the number of workers employed as domestic servants in industry and in the farm sector has collapsed dramatically. At the same time, professional, managerial, clerical, sales, and service workers tripled, growing from 1/4 to 3/4 of total employment. In other words, productive jobs have, just as predicted, been largely automated away, even if you count industrial workers globally, including the toiling masses in India and China. Such workers are still not nearly so large a percentage of the world population as they used to be. So, right, fewer public servants, fewer people working in warehouses, in like manufacturing. A lot fewer people doing those jobs because we have machines that do them now. But those people still have to have work. The people that were doing those kinds of jobs still need to have employment somewhere. But rather than allowing a massive reduction of working hours to free the world's population to pursue their own projects, pleasures, visions, and ideas, we've seen the ballooning of not even so much of the service sector as of the administrative sector, up to and including the creation of whole new industries like financial services or telemarketing, or the unprecedented expansion of sectors like corporate law, academic and health administration, human resources, and public relations. And these numbers do not even reflect on all those people whose job is to provide administrative, technical, or security support for those industries, or for that matter, the whole host of ancillary industries, dog washers, all-night pizza delivery, that only exist because everyone else is spending so much of their time working in all the other ones. These are what I propose to call bullshit jobs. It's as if someone were out there making pointless jobs up just for the sake of keeping us all working. And here precisely lies the mystery. In capitalism, this is precisely what is not supposed to happen. Sure, in the old inefficient socialist states like the Soviet Union, where employment was considered both a right and a sacred duty, the system made up as many jobs as they had to. This is why in Soviet department stores it took 3 clerks to sell a piece of meat. But, of course, this is the sort of very problem market competition is supposed to fix. Here, let me send you the link to this if you would like to copy it and read this on your own, but I'll finish reading through it if you're gonna get back and watch the end of it. Okay, according to economic theory at least, the last thing a profit-seeking firm is going to do is shell out money to workers they don't really need to employ. Still, somehow it happens. While corporations may engage in ruthless downsizing, The layoffs and speed ups invariably fall on that class of people who are actually making, moving, fixing, and maintaining things. Through some strange alchemy no one can quite explain, the number of salaried paper pushers ultimately seems to expand, and more employees find themselves, not unlike Soviet workers actually, working 40 or even 50-hour weeks on paper, but effectively working 15 hours, just as Keynes predicted, since the rest of their time is spent organizing or attending motivational seminars, updating their Facebook profiles, or downloading TV box sets. So, there have been studies done, more than one, that suggest that the average person who's working 40 hours a week, so in America that's 8-hour days that are really 9 hours because it's 8 hours plus an hour of lunch, they only get 4 hours of practical work done. In an 8-hour day, only 4 hours are really spent working. So conceivably, you could get rid of those other 4 hours, and then you would just try to be more productive, more focused for the 4 hours when work needs to get done, and everybody would get 4 hours of their day back, maybe 5 hours of their day because they wouldn't have lunch anymore. So not quite 15 hours a week, more like 20, but again, that's not necessarily the same across every job either. I'm sure plenty of jobs you work even less than 15, like actual work less than 15. But you've still got to be there for 40 hours. The answer clearly isn't economic. It's moral and political. The ruling class has figured out that a happy and productive population with free time on their hands is a mortal danger. Think of what started to happen when this became even approximated in the 1960s. And, on the other hand, the feeling that work is a moral value in itself and that anyone not willing to submit themselves to some kind of intense work discipline for most of their waking hours deserves nothing is extraordinarily convenient for them. There is basically one verse in the Bible that people use to justify this. There's a verse that says, "If a man will not work, neither shall he eat." And they use that verse from the Bible to explain why poor people shouldn't get paid more, basically. Once, when contemplating the apparently endless growth of administrative responsibilities in British academic departments, I came up with one possible vision of hell. Hell is a collection of individuals who are spending the bulk of their time working on a task they don't like and aren't especially good at. Say they were hired because they were excellent cabinet makers, and then discover they are expected to spend a great deal of their time frying fish. Neither does the task really need to be done. At least, there's only a very limited number of fish that need to be fried. Yet somehow, they all become so obsessed with resentment at the thought that some of their coworkers might be spending more time making cabinets and not doing their fair share of their fish frying responsibilities, that before long there's endless piles of useless, badly cooked fish piling up all over the workshop, and it's all that anyone really does. I think this is actually a pretty accurate description of the moral dynamics of our own economy. Now I realize any such argument is going to run into immediate objections. Who are you to say what jobs are really necessary? What's necessary anyway? You're an anthropology professor. What's the need for that? And indeed, a lot of tabloid readers would take the existence of my job as the very definition of wasteful social expenditure. And on one level, this is absolutely true. This is obviously true, rather. There can be no objective measure of social value. I would not presume to tell someone who is convinced they are making a meaningful contribution to the world that really they are not. But what about those people who are themselves convinced their jobs are meaningless? Not long ago, I got back in touch with a school friend who I hadn't seen since I was 12. I was amazed to discover that in the interim he'd become first a poet, then the frontman in an indie rock band. I'd heard some of his songs on the radio, having no idea that the singer was someone I actually knew. He was obviously brilliant, innovative, and his work had unquestionably brightened and improved the lives of people all over the world. Yet, after a couple of unsuccessful albums, he'd lost his contract, and plagued with debts and a newborn daughter, ended up, as he put it, taking the default choice of so many directionless folk, law school. Now he's a corporate lawyer working in a prominent New York firm. He was the first to admit that his job was utterly meaningless, contributed nothing to the world, and in his own estimation should not really exist. There's a lot of questions one could ask here, starting with, what does it say about our society that it seems to generate an extremely limited demand for talented poet-musicians, but an apparently infinite demand for specialists in corporate law? Answer. If 1% of the population controls most of the disposable wealth, what we call the market reflects what they think is useful and important, not anybody else. But even more, it shows that most people in those jobs are ultimately aware of it. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever met a corporate lawyer who didn't think their job was bullshit. The same goes for almost all the new industries outlined above. There's a whole class of salaried professionals that, should you meet them at parties and admit that you do something that might be considered interesting, an anthropologist, for example, will want to avoid even discussing their line of work entirely. Give them a few drinks and they will launch into tirades about how pointless and stupid their job really is. This is a profound psychological violence here. How can one even begin to speak of dignity in labor when one secretly feels one's job should not exist? How can it not create a sense of deep rage and resentment? Yet it is the particular genius of our society that its rulers have figured out a way, as in the case of the fish fryers, to ensure that rage is directed precisely against those who actually do get to do meaningful work. For instance, in our society there seems to be a general rule that the more obviously one's work benefits other people, the less one is likely to be paid for it. Again, an objective measure is hard to find, but one easy way to get a sense is to ask, say, what would happen were this entire class of people to simply disappear? Say what you like about nurses, garbage collectors, or mechanics. It's obvious that were they to vanish in a puff of smoke, the result would be immediate and catastrophic. A world without teachers or dock workers would soon be in trouble, and even one without science fiction writers or ska musicians would clearly be a lesser place. It's not entirely clear how humanity would suffer were all private equity CEOs, lobbyists, PR researchers, actuaries, telemarketers, bailiffs, or legal consultants to similarly vanish. Many suspect it might markedly improve. Yet apart from a handful of well-touted exceptions, doctors, the rule holds surprisingly well. Even more perverse, there seems to be a broad sense that this is the way things should be. This is one of the secret strengths of right-wing populism. You can see it when tabloids whip up resentment against tube workers for paralyzing London during contract disputes. The very fact that tube workers can paralyze London shows that their work is actually necessary, but this seems to be precisely what annoys people. It's even clearer in the US, where Republicans have had remarkable success mobilizing resentment against school teachers or auto workers, and not, significantly, against the school administrators or auto industry managers who actually cause the problems, for their supposedly bloated wages and benefits. It's as if they're being told, but you get to teach children, or make cars, you get to have real jobs. And on top of that, you have the nerve to also expect middle-class pensions and health care? If someone had designed a work regime perfectly suited to maintaining the power of finance capital, it's hard to see how they could have done a better job. Real productive workers are relentlessly squeezed and exploited. The remainder are divided between a terrorized stratum of the universally reviled, unemployed, and a larger stratum who are basically paid to do nothing in positions designed to make them identify with the perspectives and sensibilities of the ruling class, managers, administrators, etc., and particularly its financial avatars, but at the same time foster a simmering resentment against anyone whose work has clear and undeniable social value. Clearly, the system was never consciously designed. It emerged from almost a century of trial and error, but it's the only explanation for why, despite our technological capacities, we're not all working 3 to 4 hour days. So that is Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. And I think it's an excellent piece. The book is better. It fleshes out his arguments much more extensively. I'm sure you could find it online. I would recommend it if you're looking for something to read. I enjoyed it, and it was not a hugely difficult book to get through. But I'm going to call it for today. I'm going to go to bed. Next week, should be back much more regularly. Probably Monday through Thursday, at least for a while.